I'm Canadian, and what that means is that I'm a survivor skier. What that means is that if I go skiing by myself, I'll probably survive. But if you go skiing with me, you might not. I'm not that good. But I had a friend, Jenny, who was an avid skier, and she convinced me to go with her one night skiing. So we went skiing together, and we're on the chairlift going up this hill in the evening, and that's when I saw it. It was unbelievable. The moon. It was full. It was like bright red. It was the kind of red that kind of puts a little bit of fear in you, like Jesus might come back any minute now. You know, I saw a bumper sticker one time. It said, "Jesus is coming, quick, look busy." It was one of those moments of fear for me. And I said to Jenny, look at the moon. Is that the best moon you've ever seen? And Jenny looked at the moon and said, "Well, it's full." I thought, that's crazy. It's full. It's not just full. It's like crimson. It's like apocalyptic. It's like the end of the world kind of ready. And this kind of went on all night long. Finally, we're on the last chairlift of the night. And I say to Jenny, I think you need to look at the moon one more time because I feel like you're missing a moment. This is the best moon in my entire life I have ever seen. Look one more time. So Jenny looks at the moon one more time. She's really trying to take it in. And then she looks at me and she looks at the moon and she looks at me and she goes, "Oh, I see," she said. "You know those are rose-tinted goggles, right?" I said, "I do now." Rose-tinted goggles. Now, I immediately wanted to get a pair of these and wear them every day of my life because they made everything better. And I want to have a look at how the way you see things matters in terms of what you see. There's no one like Jesus to help us reframe how we see the world because he sees everything and everyone differently. He's not wearing rose-tinted goggles. He's not naive. It's not idealism that Jesus is seeing. It's actual kingdom lenses that he's looking through. He sees everyone and everything through the lens of God's kingdom. Here's a great example of this from the Gospel of John, chapter 9. I want to read it because the story has principles in it that will help us see everyone and everything and every situation differently. It says this: Jesus is walking along and he saw a man who had been blind from birth. "Rabbi," his disciples asked him, "why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins?" "It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins," Jesus answered. "This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the tasks assigned us by the one who sent us." Verse 6 says, "Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, 'Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam.' And Siloam means sent. So the man went and washed and came back seeing." The first frame of this situation are the disciples asking Jesus this question: whose fault is it? We can spend a lot of time on this question. Whose fault is it? We can spend all of our energy and time looking for blame. And this is a normal response to suffering or darkness or anything that makes us uncomfortable. But here's the thing Jesus understands, and what I think we should know: it won't get us anywhere. In this particular situation, the disciples are on the outskirts of a city where a man is begging because he's born blind. And they ask this question: who sinned, this man or his parents? In other words, whose fault is this? Now, this is in keeping with their social and religious framework. Someone has got to be blamed for this kind of suffering. The reality is that there is blame to go around. If we wanted to, we could spend this whole teaching series on who is to blame for how the relationships between women and men have been eroding for generations. Is it men's fault? Yes. Is it culture's fault? Yes. Is it Eve's fault? Sure. Is it the devil? Yes. Now, to be sure, it will be important for reconciliation for people to take responsibility for what they've done or haven't done that has injured and contributed to the state of affairs. But to simply think that finding blame might be an answer to our dilemma is naive at best. It can be a very big and easy trap to fall into. But even if we answer all the blame questions, where will we be? We'll be in the exact same place. We'll still be at the side of the road with a blind guy. My experience tells me that we choose to find fault with current situations when we want to escape responsibility to change them. But Jesus refuses this framework. This is what he says. This is not his fault or his parents'. This has happened so the glory or the power or the light of God might be seen in him. What? Jesus absolutely reframes the situation. This is no longer about finding blame. Now it's about looking for opportunity. Instead of why me or why this, it moves to a what now. And this is a massive and important shift to make in our lives. Finding where you're located on this map of change is not bad news. Although an honest assessment will be helpful and somewhat painful, it's not the ending place, it's the starting place. The question that dominates us is, so what now? How might the power of God be seen in the situation between men and women right now? Far from escaping the reality of the situation, this is a proper evaluation of where we find ourselves. We're at the side of a road where a lot of women and girls find themselves excluded from boardrooms and church platforms and leadership teams, unable to really choose their own future. Right now, all the research tells us that a woman's self-confidence peaks at 9 years old. Think about that. When you hear that, you might think to yourself, whose fault is it? And we could make a long list. Puberty, culture, advertisers, male figures, abusive or dismissive behaviors, systems of exclusion, toy makers who use gender biases to market toys that determine outcomes for our children, competitive peers, mean girls. The list goes on and on and on. But what if we asked what God might want to do right now? What if we started to take this opportunity, as horrible as it is, to change things? To look for ways to partner with God in helping change the outcome for the next generation. Think back to that story about Jesus, and we could get some clues about how we do this, how we bring a transformation to a difficult situation. There's a few principles in this story that I want to break down. Here's principle number 1. Jesus uses every natural means necessary. What I mean by this is that Jesus does what we don't see coming. This man needs a miracle, so Jesus spits on the ground and makes mud. I don't know, this is the weirdest response to need in the Gospels, I think, for Jesus just to spit and make some mud. Jesus is using dirt and spit to do kingdom work. It's because Jesus is not above using very natural material things to help bring healing in our world. Sometimes intentional practices of affirmation, for example, or great examples of strong women leaders, or journals, or modeling equality through equitable relationships can all be natural remedies for change. Here's some other natural ideas when it comes to women and men working together. Quotas. Think about a brace made for a child's foot that's pointing in the wrong way. Without intentional correction, the child will not be able to run properly ever again. See, global research and experts in creating equality at work suggest a corrective measure for gender balance at work. They call it the 30% quota. It's like a brace for gender equity. 30% of women on leadership boards or actively at work avoids what they call the only syndrome. This often tends to be women who are the only ones in the workplace, or the only one on the leadership team, or the only one at that table. This turns into tokenism, or the woman becomes an exception to the rules. If you want to change the rules, then aiming for 30% of women in leadership is the best way to do it. Women who are the only one in leadership settings tend to leave. They're simply exhausted trying to fit in or being the only dissenting voice at the table. They get tired of being the exception. All the research suggests that women bring something powerfully transformational to leadership cultures when they're 30% represented. This allows them to have community peer support, be part of collaborative approaches, and it benefits the entire team. I remember hearing years ago about a test for Hollywood created by activists wanting to see women represented differently on screen. The test for a movie that represents women well is this. It has to have at least 2 women with names talking to each other about something other than a man. It is absolutely crazy how hard this is to find. Think about it. Your favorite movies and TV shows, give it some thought. Even more than that, think about your own culture. Can you name 2 women speakers, for example, who influence you powerfully? Can you name 2 women leaders that you regularly learn from? 2 female theologians or athletes or writers or inventors? Well, you get the idea. Without natural, intentional practices, there will be no changing the situation of men and women working together. Here's principle number 2 in the story: supernatural power. This is where faith comes in. See, Jesus infuses natural things with supernatural power. And I think it would be crazy to suggest that we can heal our fractured relationships or even our own wounds, frankly, without supernatural power. Natural remedies are helpful and useful, and God will use them. But we need transformation. And to get that, we need God. I believe God will fill us with power to accomplish what He wants us to do if we'll ask Him. He can help us change what we think is impossible. Even if we're born into systems and structures and perspectives and prejudices, we have the capacity to choose to live another way. This is part of what it means to be human, which leads us back to another principle Jesus uses to bring healing and transformation in John chapter 9. This principle number 3 is empowering practices. Jesus gives people choices. The definition of poverty is not just economic, it's about power. Poverty is disempowerment. It's the inability to choose. Jesus gives this man on the side of the road a command to obey. He tells him, "Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam." And the scripture tells us that the word Siloam means sent. Jesus is giving a man who has no choices for his entire life the chance to make a choice, the chance to choose for himself, to participate in his own healing, to obey God. Jesus does not have to do this. We know that Jesus could heal that man any way he'd like, but he gives him a command and commissions him as an apostle. You know that word sent? That's the same definition of what an apostle is, a sent one. And when this man does what Jesus tells him to, he becomes an apostle, a sent one, a witness to who Jesus is. This is mind-blowing when you think of the implications. I mean, someone who is completely outside of every system of power is now empowered to apostolic standing, the highest office in the church. Jesus empowers him. And this is consistent with the practices of Jesus when it comes to everyone who is disempowered. Women are a fantastic example of the empowering practices of Jesus. To the Samaritan woman at the well, he asks her for help. To Mary, he extends the gift of discipleship. He teaches and heals and engages and empowers women through his entire ministry. The early church also reflected this to the world, leading the charge of valuing all humanity and seeing the amazing image of God in every person. Paul talks about this in the Gospels as a strategy in the book of Galatians. What Jesus has done is erase the barriers that were used to disempower people. But in Jesus, there is now no longer slave or free, Greek or Jew, male or female, the Apostle Paul tells us. The gospel is truly radical when it comes to empowerment, and Jesus is the most empowering leader who has ever lived. What does this mean for us? It means to follow Jesus' example, we'll need to be empowered and be empowering. Power is about influence. Power is about setting people free, releasing people to be all that they are capable to be. Now, I know when I talk about power, we have a lot of triggers that come up, and we should. Most of us have believed what Lord Acton wrote over 100 years ago. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We nod our heads in agreement because far too often people in power have used their power to exercise control, to limit people, to use people, even to abuse people. But Jesus is the exception to this observation. Think about it. Jesus had absolute power and remained completely uncorrupted. How? In a word, love. But first, we should talk about how the way Jesus uses power challenges what we have traditionally understood about power. Consider these 3 corrupting ideas of power that would be helpful to address in our relationships with each other. Here's number 1. Power is a corrupting influence if your view of power is as a limited resource. But what if power isn't a limited resource? How would that change the way we view it? Jesus understood that power wasn't limited to a specific office or position or occupation or social standing. He tapped into the eternal resource of power, which meant he could give it away generously. How do you use your power? Like it's limited or unlimited? Here's number 2. Power is a corrupting influence if your view of power is controlling other people or events. What if power was less about control and more about influence? See, Jesus understood that the more power he gave, the more that power grew. Think about how you use power. Do you use it to empower or to control? Here's number 3. Power is corrupting if you think it's yours. What if power is infinite and influential and a gift? What if power doesn't belong to us? What if power is a gift that we're called to use and not possess? What if true power is about stewardship and not ownership? This is some powerful shifts that could help many of us become great stewards of God's unlimited and glorious power. The influence you have, the privilege, and any power you hold is a gift, and how you use your power is the measure of your leadership. There's one more principle that Jesus uses to transform this man's life. Jesus uses just enough mud and spit to break the Sabbath laws. Jesus breaks those laws on purpose because those laws are controlling and excluding people instead of setting them free. And here's something that Jesus is very consistent with. Jesus will break every religious or social barrier that prevents people from wholeness and freedom. He does this consistently with women and slaves and Romans and rulers and beggars and friends. When it comes to women and men working together today, there are many religious and social barriers that try to prevent us from thriving. The principle that Jesus gives us is that breaking those barriers is what great leaders do. The higher purposes of God cannot be stopped by constructs designed to exclude. Leaders who empower people to live their best lives, using their gifts for the benefit of the world, will, like Jesus, break every religious and social barrier that keeps people out of the good news of liberation. How we see people matters. I don't know about you, but I want to have a look at our relationships from a kingdom perspective. To do that, I'm going to take a page out of Jesus' leadership book. I'm going to see this time as an opportunity instead of falling into the blame game. I'm going to use every natural means I can to bring healing and wholeness to people's lives. I'm going to humble myself and ask God for His power to help me. I'm going to use power to empower other people, refusing to misuse power by controlling, limiting, or keeping it for myself. And I'm going to challenge and resist every barrier that keeps the good news from getting where it needs to go.